Hey there, and welcome to Upside Daily again. It's always a joy and a privilege to connect with you, whether it be on my Facebook page or here on podcast. That my desire is that you will live blessed because of your connection to Upside Daily. So today is episode 5 of season 2. Never run at a giant with your mouth shut. And today's episode is simply titled, I Am Not David. And the reason why I titled it like this is because sometimes we find ourselves in this place of tension where, we look at some of the Old Testament or the New Testament heroes and we think our life does not measure up to where they are. And I want to unpack that a little bit. But our journey starts for these episodes in the Old Testament with a young man called David. He was a shepherd boy, and he had an incredible encounter with a giant named Goliath on an ancient battlefield. We read about this in 1 Samuel chapter 17, where David says to the Philistine, this giant, says to him, "You come against me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. And this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head." And this is such a powerful moment, where he recognizes the battle is the Lord's, and it's not his. It belongs to God, and he will give Goliath into his hands. Ultimately, this series is about the power of what we speak. And in this story, we read much of the things people say. David is anointed as king over Israel, God said. And then we fast track into the story, and it's Goliath says, and David said, and the brother said, and Goliath said, and Saul said, and David runs towards the Philistine, and David prevails over the Philistine. We have to understand that the words we say, the things we speak, carry weight and power. But before we even get to our words, the environment in which this battle takes place, to me personally, is quite significant. Here we have quite a few references in this text that were just too obvious to ignore. It starts off where it says that this battle took place, close to Soka and Azekah. The Hebrew word azekah means to weave a hedge. Now, hedges presented here are the same hedge with which they forged the crown of thorns when Jesus was crucified. The battle takes place in the valley of Elah. The site of the battle is significant because the Elah Valley connects the Philistine city of Gath, Goliath's birthplace, with the Judite city of Bethlehem, David's hometown. Now just think for a moment. David was not the only one that was born in Bethlehem. And it just feels too obvious. These two references, the crown of thorns and the birthplace, the clear recognition that Christ is somehow involved in the story. I also find it fascinating that this whole valley, this whole big area was known as the Shephelah, which means humble or meek. And it was like a theater. On the one side, you'd have the Israelites. On the other hand, you'd have the Philistines stood on this mountain. And here, in this place of meekness, this place of humbleness, this battle between David and Goliath would transpire. Humbleness, meekness, incredible, just the sense, the preposterous giant that, comes and defies God, and David that recognizes the work of God in this moment. Lastly, the word Elah means terebinth or oak tree. Now, just consider this for a moment. The place where David slew Goliath is also associated with a tree, the crown of thorns, the birthplace of Christ, the tree against which he was crucified, the cross, where all of humanity was brought into a place of redemption. As I read this, it just feels it is too obvious to ignore. You see, for me and you, the reality is that we all face giants at some other time. Personal strongholds like debt maybe, or broken places in our lives, work, prayerlessness? How about the giant of perceiving God as too small? And it has impact on our lives. Fear, intimidation. It hinders our spiritual progress. These feelings that things might never change, or feelings of repeated defeat, lack of joy, lack of vision, and hope that is lost. But when you start to understand your identity, when you start to recognize, that there was something at work before all of this started to play off, you have to recognize that actually you are speaking to a giant. You're speaking to a mountain. And this is where the New Testament comes into it, because the Bible addresses our capacity to speak to giants and mountains. We see here in the Old Testament the example of David and Goliath, but in the New Testament we see Christ. And this is important to understand, because I am not David. I'm not about to battle with a giant. I'm not a shepherd. I've never been a shepherd boy. I've never had a sling, a stone at anyone. As a matter of fact, if I ever did see a giant, I'm not sure at a sling and a small little stone would be the best way for me to go about this. How do you and I do this? How do we respond? How do we access this moment where we face giants in our lives? Now, Jesus speaks about this when he uses the analogy of mountains several times in the New Testament. And I'd like to end off by just reading this verse to you today, because we have to recognize, though I might not be David, though I might not be facing a physical giant, there are giants we each face. And listen to what Jesus says in Matthew 17, verse 20. He says, "Because of your unbelief, assuredly I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." I'm not David, but I certainly do face giants from time to time. Mountains, if you want to. Tomorrow we're going to explore exactly this. It's going to get real. Very deep and very significant, because you have to connect again tomorrow to listen further, to understand what it means to run at a giant with your mouth wide open. But for now, thank you for listening on Upside Daily today. I'm trusting that you will continue to be empowered to turn your world upside down. So while you just consider these few humble thoughts of today, just how Christ was involved in this moment, I'm looking forward to see you again tomorrow. But until then, live blessed.